The combat medic who refused to leave, even when the evac was full. The sandstorm hit just as the evac birds were full. The roar of rotors mixed with the chaos, shouted orders, the metallic clatter of stretchers, the choked coughs of wounded men breathing through blood and dust. The desert air burned like fire, each gust slapping grit across exposed skin. Inside the perimeter of Forward Operating Base Archer, everything was movement. Medics, riflemen, engineers. Everyone except the one woman kneeling in the sand beside the last patient. Corporal Lena Vasquez didn't look up when the helicopter crew chief shouted, "We're full! That's the last bird." She just kept pressing her hands against the tourniquet of a young corporal whose femoral artery had torn open. The blood had slowed, but not enough. Around her, the storm turned day into darkness, the sky bleeding copper and red. Her gloves were soaked, her uniform caked with dust that stuck to the sweat running down her temples. "Vasquez, you've got 30 seconds." The flight medic's voice barely cut through the noise. She didn't respond. 30 seconds wasn't enough to stop the bleeding, and she knew it. It was never enough. The helicopter began to lift, rotor wash kicking a wall of sand over her, but Lena stayed crouched low, shielding the patient with her body as if her small frame could protect him from the war itself. When the storm finally swallowed the bird whole, the desert went silent, except for the ragged breathing of the man on the stretcher. Lena Vasquez had been deployed for 7 months with the 61st Medical Company, attached to an infantry unit operating in the Helmand Province. Most days, her war was fought in whispers, stabilizing fractures, checking vitals, stitching torn skin by flashlight. She wasn't the loud type. Her voice rarely rose above a calm tone, even when chaos screamed around her. Her fellow soldiers often joked, "You never know what's going on in Vasquez's head." The truth was, she preferred it that way. Words didn't stop bleeding. Hands did. When she first arrived at FOB Archer, she was easy to overlook. Small frame, calm eyes, a medic's patch barely visible under the dust. But those who had seen her in the field knew better. The infantrymen who had bled out in the back of MRAPs. The sergeants she had dragged out of burning vehicles. They all carried stories about the quiet medic who never hesitated. Still, no one really knew her. Not where she came from, not why she volunteered for frontline duty instead of staying behind the wire. Lena had grown up in El Paso, Texas, daughter of a paramedic mother and a mechanic father. Her mother used to say, saving lives isn't about glory. It's about not freezing when someone's counting on you. When her mother died in a highway accident on duty, Lena stopped talking much. By the time she joined the Army, silence had become her armor. That afternoon in Helmand had started like any other. Another convoy, another supply run. But halfway through, the lead vehicle hit an IED buried deep under the sand. The explosion ripped through the road like lightning. Metal twisted, dust boiled upward. Men screamed over the comms. Lena was in the second truck. The blast wave slammed her against the door, but she didn't wait for orders. By the time the others scrambled out, she was already moving. Grabbing her med kit, sprinting toward the smoke, heat waves rippling the air. "Stay back! Secondary," someone shouted. She ignored it. Training screamed in her head. Time is blood. She slid down next to a corporal whose leg was shredded from the knee down. Tourniquet, clamp pressure, breath. She worked like a machine. No panic, no wasted motion. 2 more soldiers down by the wreck, one unconscious, one barely breathing. She crawled through fire-blackened debris, pulling bodies free one at a time. Her hands blistered through her gloves, but she didn't stop. The radio crackled. "Evac ETA, 8 minutes." 8 minutes felt like forever when a man's pulse was fading in your palm. By the time the Blackhawks came in, the sandstorm had started. Visibility dropped to nothing. The pilots couldn't stay long. Fuel and dust intake limits. They loaded what they could. 6 critical casualties, 2 walking wounded, and 1 medic ordered aboard. That medic was supposed to be Lena. But when she saw there was no room for the last stretcher, the corporal whose leg she just saved, she stepped back. "Get him in first," she said. The crew chief frowned. "We've got 1 spot left, ma'am. That's for you." Lena shook her head. "Then he's going instead." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The crew chief hesitated, regulations were clear, but the look in her eyes was colder than the storm around them. He pulled the corporal in, shouted something she couldn't hear over the wind, and then the bird was gone. When silence fell again, Lena was the only one left in the open. Sand stung her eyes. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of blood that wasn't hers. Command didn't realize she was missing until 2 hours later. The convoy had scattered to different forward positions during the chaos, and with communications jammed by the storm, no one knew who was left. By nightfall, Lena was huddled in a shallow trench with the wounded who hadn't made the first lift. She checked pulses by touch, spoke in quiet Spanish to keep them calm. The same words her mother once whispered to accident victims on highways long gone. Respira conmigo. You're not leaving here tonight. She had one morphine injector left, 2 bottles of saline, and 6 lives depending on her hands. When she heard the distant rattle of gunfire echoing through the storm, she knew what it meant. Insurgents closing in on the crash site. She reached for her rifle, propped beside her pack. Her shooting wasn't perfect, but her aim didn't need to be. She positioned herself between the wounded and the sound. Every few minutes, she checked their breathing, her voice calm, steady, grounding the chaos. Hours passed, no radio, no lights, just heartbeat after heartbeat. The storm didn't end that night. The desert had swallowed the horizon whole, and even the stars hid behind the swirling sand. Lena Vasquez sat with her back to a cracked mud wall, her rifle laid across her lap. Her gloved fingers trembled from dehydration, but her voice stayed steady. "Stay awake," she whispered to the corporal lying nearest to her. "Don't close your eyes, not yet." She didn't know if he could still hear her. His skin was pale, lips dry, chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. She leaned closer, adjusting his IV tube, her own canteen half empty and long since warm. Every medic learns a line during training. You are never alone until you stop talking. So she talked about her hometown, about her mother's ambulance siren that used to echo down desert streets, about how fear was just another heartbeat you had to breathe through. Her words blended with the wind, but somehow it kept them alive. By the second day, her supplies were gone. She tore strips from her uniform to reinforce bandages, melted what little water she had over a field stove to sterilize tools. Her arms ached from compressions, her throat burned from breathing dust, but she refused to stop counting pulses. When a distant convoy radio crackled through the static, faint, broken, she snapped the handset up. "This is Corporal Vasquez, 61st Medical, Grid Delta 4, 6 wounded, 2 critical, requesting immediate medevac." Nothing, only white noise. She waited, listening for a reply that never came. At dusk, the horizon shimmered with movement, silhouettes emerging through the dust. Not friendly. 6 men, rifles low, moving with that cautious, predatory rhythm she'd learned to recognize. Her pulse slowed, not quickened. She took a breath, chambered around, and shifted her body in front of the wounded. She wasn't supposed to fight. Medics were support, not offense. But there are moments when rules collapse under the weight of what's right. The first muzzle flash cut through the dark. She answered it. 2 shots, deliberate, tight. One of the figures fell. The rest scattered into the storm. Then silence again. Her heart hammered, but she didn't move. She stayed kneeling between her patients in the open desert until the horizon finally went black. The rescue team found her 29 hours later. A patrol drone had picked up the faint heat signatures. One moving, several still. When they reached the site, the scene was almost unreal. 6 wounded soldiers alive, 4 lines held in place by makeshift ties of torn uniform, and Lena Vasquez unconscious beside them, her hands still locked around a half-empty syringe. A combat medic in the sand, her body shielding the man nearest to her from stray bullets that never came. The recovery sergeant kneeled beside her, checked her pulse, then looked at the others. "She kept them breathing," he said quietly. "All of them." They lifted her onto a stretcher. Her hand didn't let go of the patient's wrist until someone gently pried it free. 3 days later, back at FOB Archer, the story had already become legend. Not the kind shouted over loudspeakers or printed in newspapers. The kind passed in whispers between bunks and chow lines. She gave up her seat on the last evac. She held out for almost 2 days. She never called for herself, only for the wounded. When Lena woke in the field hospital, her throat was raw and her lips cracked. The first thing she asked wasn't where she was. It was, did they make it? The nurse beside her nodded. Every one of them. Lena exhaled once, a quiet, trembling sigh, and turned her head toward the window. Outside, the desert still roared with wind, indifferent as ever. Command issued a commendation, of course. Bronze Star with Valor, they said. But Lena didn't attend the ceremony. She was back in the medical tent, cleaning her kit, checking syringes, restocking gauze. When her commanding officer found her there, he asked, "Why weren't you at the formation?" She didn't look up. "Because I've got another convoy leaving at 0500, sir." He stared at her for a long moment before nodding. "Corporal Vasquez, you're a damn hero." She paused, the faintest smile touching her lips. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I just didn't leave when the bird was full." Weeks later, a new medic arrived at FOB Archer. He found a single line carved into the wooden table inside the trauma tent. The words were burned in with a heated scalpel, barely legible through the scratches. "Courage isn't loud, it just stays." He asked who wrote it. No one answered. But every medic after that learned the same lesson. If the evac is full and someone's still breathing, you stay. When the story of Corporal Lena Vasquez finally reached home, it came in a folded letter carried by a pilot who'd been in the storm that day. Inside, written in steady, careful handwriting, were the only words she'd agreed to send. "Tell my mom's old station. Her girl finally made it home."